It's your favorite president, number 45. Look, I approve of this message because she's a dodo bird.
Loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic.
We did it.
Ground beef is up almost 50%.
We did it. We did it, Joe.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Complete cuckoo. And now, from Times Square, it's that Kevin Show.
Somewhere in the bowels of the city that never sleeps,
Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media,
is a man also not sleeping.
Syndicated radio talk show host Kevin McCullough.
And that guy would like a word with you.
Many of you know him as Nostradamus.
Of course that Kevin Show is going to be great. The only thing that could be greater, of course, would be that Donald Show. But we don't have that, so we have that Kevin Show.
Featuring the music of Dick Tunney and the Dream in Color Orchestra. Women from across the country react to the nomination of Kamala Harris. Ashley Hayek, KT McFarland, and Gabby Hoffman all join the conversation. A bit later on, Tom McDonald, rapper, gives props to heroes. And tonight, Kelsey Ballerini in the spotlight. And now, from Times Square, a man who finds his wealth in his friendships. Unlike the Obamas, who just rack up the mansions, here's the Kevin. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the weekend. Very glad to have you with us. I don't know if you caught this. Those of you that are faithful to the show every week, last week I danced with the black coffee mug and the white hat. But as you can clearly see, we've now added a black baseball cap to the merch closet and the beautiful white mug with the black and red lettering. And be looking on the lookout for the return of the Great Mug giveaway next week, 2 weeks. And then from there to the end of the year, a brand new That Kevin Show mug can be yours just for winning it right here. Just send your request to be entered into the contest to thatkevinshow@gmail.com. Thatkevinshow@gmail.com. Welcome, kids. I am so glad it's over. But before we go anywhere, David, yes? I don't understand the reference to the Obama's mansion thing. Oh, you didn't see the viral video of her?
She brought it up in her speech.
Right. She did. You didn't see the video?
Do we have a clip of that?
Yes.
I think it would be good if we
Yes.
take a look.
She and my father didn't aspire to be wealthy. In fact, they were suspicious of folks who took more than they needed.
Wow. I guess maybe she should. Well, those who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. I don't live in a glass house. My house is all, good old lumber. Anyway, I am glad that thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. I am glad that the conventions are done, because I kind of had this feeling that as long as the conventions were in process, there was going to be a little bit of going easier on Kamala Harris. Oh, she's got such a sad road. They had to get rid of the guy that she had to take the place of. And then, then she had to get her platform ready. And then she had to make her speech and all. Okay, she's done all that. Now it's all behind her. And Joe Biden's as grumpy as ever. I would be too. What they did to him was criminal. But they also have to now recognize that you have the most, I don't know how to put this. Is the word I'm looking for vapid? The most, to be empty of anything of substance, kind of like her mind. But is the word vapid, is that a good word? I thought it was, And then I thought, as I was listening to her speech on Friday night, and then I thought, no, vapid's not it, because if you just have emptiness, maybe people will still vote for you on the cult of personality. But I think that it's worse than that. I think that she's actually kind of not very strong. Weak would be the word I would use. I like, she doesn't have a good response. Like, I will stand with Israel as long as they understand that the like, what? You stand with somebody or you don't. You're not, well, standing, but there's no but that, like, ... what, fill in the blank. I'm not sure how that went down. So I think she's just kind of, and she didn't even talk about Ukraine, which Trump has said on day one of not his administration being sworn in. When he's president-elect, he's calling people on day one. He's calling Zelensky, he's calling Putin, he's calling the mullahs, he's calling Netanyahu. He will end these wars with leverage, smarts, thinking outside the box, other than just, let's just send billions more dollars of equipment and everything else to them and just let them keep killing each other. That advances the U.S. plight. How? I'm not quite sure. And I felt very empathetic towards the Ukrainians, but now they're blowing up oil refineries all over the world, and we've already got an energy crunch in place. I mean, I'm happy because my buddies over at Prairie Operating Group, they're gonna rake in, you know, as long as we're destroying Russian oil supplies, American domestic energy, the demand for it's just going to go through the roof. That's good for our economy, but it's not good for the world. So weak is not the right word for her. So what is the right word? Well, someone else suggested failed, and that's true, man. You talk about every test she was up against, the border, crime, inflation. Her solution to inflation is to create more inflation. Actually, I should have seen that one coming. Shame on me for being a little bit blindsided by her price control suggestion. Because if you recall, she was the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act. And she said, the nays are 51 and the yeas are 51 and the nays are 50, and boom. And then she laughed. Get ready for 4 years of that, friends, if she's elected. Yeah. But she did. She said, I'm the deciding vote. The yeas have 51. The nays have 50. The motion is passed. And with that, they sent the Inflation Reduction Act to Joe Biden's desk, and she did it. Her vote was the deciding vote, and that made inflation immediately worse. I know it's kind of tricky. They call it the Inflation Reduction Act, but in fact, they increased inflation. So when she comes out with her own plan and she's like, how can we get the prices down at the grocery store? Oh, I got it. Let me give them the suggestion that'll raise the prices at the grocery store. Because that's exactly what price controls did in Venezuela and Cuba and the USSR and China. It worked so good in all those other, like, it was a perfect solution. You want to raise grocery prices, create scarcity of product, put price controls in. Because she's attacking big grocery. Those meanies making 2% profit on a year. Ooh, wow, those guys are mean.
We need to get radical about what we are doing and take it seriously.
As President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance.
Let's eliminate all of that.
But would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What people
yes.
To reduce red meat specifically.
Yes, I would.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Where do you stand on defund the police?
This whole movement is about rightly saying we need to take a look at these budgets.
Harris asserted that ICE is perceived as the modern-day Ku Klux Klan.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
That puts ICE in the same category as the KKK. Is that what you're asking me? I see no parallel.
I'm not finished.
I see none.
I mean, in honesty, I think it's beyond failed. I think it's I think it's dangerous. I think she is dangerous. I think she is dangerous because she keeps talking about how on day one, you know that on day one for her, it was 3.5 years ago. The nature of her character creates danger for the impoverished in our country, for our allies around the world, for our own homes and well-being. She is vapid, weak.
But most importantly, she's dangerous. And we need to pay attention. Big show straight ahead. Kevin McCullough, couldn't be happier than to have you with us. Stay right here.
Back to that Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us at That Kevin Show, cleverly titled. Joining me is Ashley Hayek. She is the executive director for America First Works. It's part of the larger universe of the America First Policy Institute. Ashley, it's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me, as always.
There's been so much discussion about how the race is changing because Kamala Harris is now the selected nominee. She wasn't voted for. Nobody voted for her yet. She's run twice now for president, and she's not received a single vote. But she has been selected. She will be the front person for this. And you know, because you've been part of my show for a while, that I've talked about women's issues for a long, long time, way out in front of everything else. And I think that Trump and the Republicans as a whole can make a lot of headway with women this cycle, specifically when it comes to the safety of children in their schools, specifically their daughters, specifically keeping boys out of their daughters' locker rooms. But Mayor Pete is out this last week saying that the left isn't anti-family. Ashley, you're a mom. Your reaction?
Yeah, so a couple things. About 2 years ago, the America First Policy Institute unveiled the America First Women's Agenda. It was based off of Kellyanne Conway's, in her book, The Safe Agenda. It's security, affordability, fairness, and education. So using those pillars, let's break down this administration, the Biden-Harris administration, security. And this could also be, you know, financial security. It's, you know, are they protecting, I don't know, say men in a women's bathroom or boys in a girl's bathroom? No. Are you safe in your communities? No. When you have a border crisis, that look at, you know, the 3 women that are highly featured because of the border crisis, Blake and Riley being one of them in Georgia, murdered by illegal aliens. You don't have a safe community for women or children. Is it affordable? Absolutely not. You know, 1 in 3 parents saying that they can't afford school supplies for their kids for going back to school. Inflation out of control, cost of living out of control. Kamala Harris is she was the tie-breaking vote for what I like to call big government socialism bill, the Build Back Better bill that Joe Biden put forth, and that caused rampant inflation. You look at fairness, and again, is it fair for boys to compete against girls? Is it fair for schools to get their funding cut because they refuse to play into the radical left's transgender agenda of, transing your kid behind a parent's back? And then education. And we have seen time and again that conservatives, the America First movement, President Trump has been a champion of school choice. And meanwhile, the left and Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and the rest of them, they all bow down to the national teacher union bosses who wanted to mask our kids, indoctrinate them, and keep them out of school, and forget giving parents the choice on where to send your child to school. And when you look at all of those pieces, is the Democrat Party, is the radical left, is Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg and Tim Walz and the rest of them, are they really providing an agenda that is good for women and children? Absolutely not. And
no, Ashley, you're
obvious.
misunderstanding. You're misunderstanding. That's the old left. They picked Tim Walz to be the running mate, so they fixed all those problems, right? They balanced out. They got a nice moderate who would, appeal to the center of the country.
Right. Well, and another thing, I think it's so interesting when you have a woman who's chirping on race and gender. It was so interesting. I did this interview last week, and this guy touted off, this administration put 50, Black judges. Why does race matter? And if you care that much, why did she choose an old white guy to be her running mate if she really cares about diversity so much? The hypocrisy from the left is absolutely astounding. And by the way, we need to remind people that Kamala Harris hasn't changed her position at all. She actually hasn't said anything. She hasn't done a press conference. She hasn't rolled out any of her policy plans. That's her staff kind of changing things on her website in the background. She hasn't told us where she stands in the economy or where she stands on national security. Or how about Israel? Oh, that's right. She made sure not to choose a person to be her running mate because he was a Jewish American. So we see her kowtowing to the radical parts, the most radical parts of the Democrat Party in her run for presidency, but also refusing to tell us where she stands because she doesn't want to have to answer to them at the same time.
I want to stay on this topic for a little bit because the strategy is obvious. And by the way, for those of you confused, I don't actually believe Tim Walz is a moderate. The reason I joked with that with Ashley is because he has actually signed legislation to take your kids away from you if you won't let them cut off their body parts once they've been brainwashed into doing it by their public school teacher. He signed that legislation into law in Minnesota. That's Tim Walz. So yeah, she picked an equally radical counterpart as her running mate. There's no balance to that ticket at all. But Ashley, let me microscope in on this for a second, because the strategy is obvious that they are going to play for the female vote. The single female vote is radically hyper on other things. And I think that Trump has done a very good job of addressing many of the issues that the suburban moms care about. But Kamala's going to bathe in abortion blood. This is what she's going to be, dressed like Braveheart at her convention. She's going to have blood paint on her face, and she's going to come out and she's going to give the war speech that she's going to stop the mean, nasty men from letting you kill your baby. Oh, by the way, in only, the states that actually have those bans, because a lot of the country doesn't. The former president was asked about this over the weekend, and in his 90-minute freeform press gathering that he gave, by the way, answered every question, didn't back down, just stood there and gave answers. But he said that this issue is not as animated this time around. Since the fall of Roe, since Dobbs, Democrats have had some success in places like Iowa and Kansas, doing things on the abortion issue that I think people were surprised by. How important, as a female voter, do you perceive Kamala's emphasis on abortion to be when it comes down to what people are really casting ballots for on November 5th?
The amount of people that are motivated by the extreme policies of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are very, very, very small because they've gone too far, quite frankly. One of the things that we learned with Governor Tim Walz is that in his state, they allowed abortions after the baby was born, where
beyond
the
pregnancy.
doctors beyond pregnancy, where the doctor was supposed to save that baby that was born alive and didn't. And there were no repercussions for that. That's too far for the American people, no matter how pro-choice or pro-life, that's too far. At the end of the day, right now, people are choosing between heating and eating. People are trying to determine, are they going to be able to take that summer vacation before school starts up again? These are real issues that are affecting everyday Americans. When your communities are unsafe, literally crime is skyrocketing. When you can't afford groceries, when you have fentanyl overdoses, which is the number one killer of youth, that's the conversation is not how late can I have this abortion. The amount of people that is affecting is so incredibly small. And I hand it to the states for leaders like Kim Reynolds and Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott and Governor Kemp, who took it and ran with it and, had a position, and they were the ones who were most successful in their elections in 2022.
We're going to take a quick break. Got to pay some bills. She's Ashley Hayek of America First Works. Kevin McCullough from Times Square. Don't go away.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. From New York, That Kevin. Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back. It is That Kevin Show from Times Square, and very glad to have you with us, and very honored to have Ashley Hayek back with us. She's the author of Beat the Cheats. If you haven't gotten it, it will explain exactly what needs to be done, and I think we're doing it. I think that we've made a lot of progress on how to square this election and get it done legally and properly and by a good margin, but we're going to have to all do our part come November 5th or before then. But Ashley, you were talking about the extremism of the Kamala ticket, and they're going to try to hide it. They've already tried this little tactic of, adopting Trump's policies. Like the day she finds out she's going to be endorsed by everybody, she goes, well, I'm for fracking now. And of course, Pennsylvania and Ohio, and like, well, why now? Why not the last 3.5 years when you've been destroying jobs in our energy sector? But even just this last week, she's out saying, and we got to end the taxation on tips, which is a direct steal from Donald Trump. He introduced this back in April. Is the press going to give her a hard time for being the copycat Kamala?
There's no way. First of all, how amazing was it to see how she was the worst vice president in history she's God's gift and amazing literally overnight. That was pretty astounding from the mainstream media. But she plagiarized President Trump's no tax on tips plan. She doesn't have an original thought in her body. She can't debate him, as President Trump said, because she's not a very smart woman. And she's very political. She does what is politically convenient for her. And that's not what the American people want. Look at her Green New Deal. She actually has never said, I'm for fracking. It's her staff behind her and her surrogates that are putting it out on her behalf. But she is one of the biggest proponents of the Green New Deal, which will
She was a co-sponsor in the Senate.
Absolutely. Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, that has major ramifications in those states. So she can try, and you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. They can try and cover it up, but she has an incredible track record. Look what she did as district attorney in San Francisco. Look at her role as California Attorney General with Prop 47 and 57, which led to rampant homelessness. And then now the smash and grabs that are happening in the state with businesses shutting down that have been there for generations. This is a woman who is radical across the board, and nothing is going to change. And remember, she was the one in the room when all those big decisions were made. When Afghanistan, Abbey-gate is coming up, the anniversary of that. She was in the room, a part of that decision. She was the deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act, which didn't reduce inflation at all. It caused
multiplied
massive inflation. Exactly. Right. Who allowed? So she also was part of legislation that empowers and adds 87,000 more IRS agents to go after low and middle income families. So I don't really care if you say you're, no tax on tips. Everything you've done in your career has been the exact opposite of empowering the American worker.
Well, and that's the thing that I really do think that the American voters, if those of us that have microphones can speak up and speak out, we're not going to ever overpower the legacy media. But the fact that we have social media, the fact that we have sources of information, the fact that we have places like Salem Radio and Salem News Channel, townhall.com and others that can provide the actual facts of the narrative and not just a spin on it, I think is going to make a huge difference. My concern, and this can come back to kind of full circle to your book, but do we have the ground game? Do we have the lawyers in place? Do we have the modifications in the laws necessary to ensure that we have a less dishonest election than we had the last go around? And Ashley, you wrote the book on it, but what's your sense of where we're at?
Well, first of all, I'm very thankful we have Michael Watley and Laura Trump, who are at the helm at the RNC. They've already recruited, I think it was over 100,000 poll watchers, which is absolutely critical. There's still time to sign up to be a poll watcher. We need poll watchers and poll workers. And I think just knowing that there are people who are willing to be in the room when those votes are being counted is critical. AFPI has
I had not heard that number. 100,000 is a lot of people.
It's a lot of people, and it's so important. And then having the attorneys to be there as well. I know that they've been working on recruiting attorneys, and I believe they're close to their quota as well. But they need more. We need as many people. We need all hands on deck. When you have someone who's trying to cheat, and you have the judge in the room watching, people are a little bit more cautious about whether or not they're cheating or not. So we just need more people, all hands on deck. And by the way, Pennsylvania early vote starts in 35 days. We cannot take anything for granted. It's no longer election day. We just launched a campaign, Red, Right, and Win, to share, if you're in California, with the people in the battleground states, the draconian policies of Kamala Harris through a letter writing campaign. We'd love to have more help with that as well.
All right. And that's all at the America First Works website. All right.
Yes.
Ashley Hayek, thank you for checking in with us. We will talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Thank you. Sounds great.
You got it. Kevin McCullough coming right back from Times Square. Don't go anywhere.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. From New York, That Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. Kevin McCullough, glad to have you with us. That Kevin Show, always thrilled to have KT McFarland joining us. And as she does so pretty much every week, I love to pick her brain on all things related to our national security. And KT, when it comes to this election, and particularly the crazy month that we've just had, if we're going from the debate through the assassination attempt, through the dropout, through the kind of selection of the new nominee, to the coronation of her VP, whatever process you call it, it's not democracy. Let's put it for sure that way. But there are significant differences of policy preferences that really matter in this election. And I'm trying to get across the seriousness of that to the people that I reach each day. And I don't think it demonstrates itself any more problematically than in the area of national security and foreign policy. You've studied a lot of this. You've seen a lot of presidents. You know the kind of ramifications of the different kind of schools of thought on these two kind of viewpoints. How would you describe Kamala's approach to our hostile powers and our friendly powers as being different than Donald Trump's?
Well, it depends on which Kamala Harris you're talking about. I mean, the one of the, the last 20 or 30 years of her policy, or the one of the last 48 hours of her policy. I'm going to go with her lifelong record, particularly her record in the Biden administration. So the most obvious is the border. She was the border czar. She was in charge of the border. She left the border open. In fact, she opened it wider in anticipation of people coming across the border and then having non-citizens vote. I mean, that was the whole point of the Biden-Harris Democrat border policy. They knew they were keeping it open. They wanted to keep it open. They just didn't want you to know that they were keeping it open. But their whole point was to get 10 million new voters. Illegally, by the way. You can't vote if you're not an American citizen. But they were going to worry about that later. So number one would be the border, but then probably equally as important for international policy is the energy policy. You know, she has been a lifelong advocate for a ban on fracking, a ban on American energy production. Biden he just sort of constricted it and had a war on American fossil fuels, but he didn't ban them outright. She wants to ban them outright. And so what would that mean? Well, it would wreak havoc on the American economy. I mean, if you don't like paying $3.50 a gallon for gas, think about how much you're going to love paying $8 a gallon for gas, because we won't make our own energy. But what it will do is it will enrich Russia. It'll enrich Iran, and they'll be able to fight these forever wars forever. The third thing that's most obvious to me is her policy towards Israel, particularly her policy towards Israel. And her policy towards Iran. She's absolutely beholden to the far left of her party, as her vice presidential selection would indicate. And the far left of her party doesn't want Israel to exist. So I think that if I were an Israeli, if I were an American Jew, if I were somebody who cares deeply about the future and survival of the state of Israel, which I do, I would be extremely concerned about Harris administration and them withholding weapons to Israel.
So, and I've never fully understood this. I know that the Obama kind of sect of the Democratic Party tends to be very pro-Iran and kind of shuns the Saudi and the Arab involvement in foreign policy. But I don't know where that conflict comes from, KT. Can you give us some context on that? Why does Obama's kind of school of thought follow an empowered Iran as being better for the world than a strong Israel and potentially a strong kind of democratic union working, in free markets and otherwise with their Arab neighbors?
Look, I can't get into their heads because to me it makes no sense whatsoever. But for some reason, they've had this unrequited love affair with Iran going back to the Obama administration. I mean, to the point where on the National Security Council in the Obama administration, their main Middle East guy, their main Iran guy, the guy who was running Iran negotiations, was a guy who was working for Iran, who was taking suggestions, shall we say, from the Iranian foreign ministry, to the point where the guy is now under serious investigation, I assume, for treason, and has been relieved of his positions in the U.S. government. This guy was also the guy who was Biden's chief Iran negotiator. So the connections with Iran are wide and they're deep in the Democrat Party. But the anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, pro-Palestinian, I mean, I guess they figure in their own minds that if they're somehow pro-Hamas and pro-Palestinian, that's going to bring peace to the Middle East, that the biggest abuser of peace in the Middle East in their minds is supposed to, I guess, Israel.
Well, I'm not even sure that Kamala thinks of it that deeply. I think she thought it was her two-state solution, as you've frequently joked on this show. But you saw her overnight numbers immediately when it went from Biden to her in Michigan and Minnesota, just, go exponentially up.
Yeah. She's a far left member of the Democrat Party. She's comfortable with the squad. She's comfortable with the anti-Semitic wing. I mean, I never thought, Kevin, that in my lifetime we would see the Democrat Party, which had always been the champion of Israel, the champion of the Jews, the champion of their rights, to somehow flip. And so now the Democrats are much more concerned with the people, the wing of their party that chants death to Israel, death to America, pro-Hamas, kill all the Jews. So somehow that wing of their party is determining their foreign policy.
And sometimes they're doing it right in our streets. Like that's the part that kind of blows me away as well. Let me shift to China, because I did not know until she announced that Kamala has a very kind of complex, thorny relationship with the communist Chinese, and Tim Walz does as well. In fact, he's spent time living in China and holding an American security clearance. I didn't even know you could do such a thing. But what's your concern there?
Okay, the problem with her vice presidential selection, Tim Walz, is he was in China more than 30 times over the last decade or so, and speaks very warmly and fondly of China. Now, he says now that one of the reasons he was so concerned with China was because of China's human rights record. But, I've been working on Chinese relations and Chinese affairs since the early 1970s, when I was Henry Kissinger's aide, when he made the secret trip to China and we had the opening to China. And the Chinese government does not make people welcome if they're critics of the Chinese government. Walz has said many times, the Chinese government made me feel right at home and really helped my visits to China. Well, China doesn't have, immediate, they play the long game in China.
KT McFarland, you are so insightful. Thank you for your help. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Kev.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
Hi, I'm Kamala Harris, and I do not approve this message because I reversed all of my positions on these issues last week in my convention. Yes, I'm two-faced, but at least I'm honest about it.
Yeah, I am radical. We need to get radical about what we are doing and take it seriously. As President of the United States, I am prepared to get rid of the filibuster to pass a Green New Deal. There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
We have to have a buyback program, and I support a mandatory buyback program.
I believe it will totally eliminate private insurance.
Let's eliminate all of that. But would you support changing the dietary guidelines?
Yes.
The food pyramid. What would people
yes.
To reduce red meat specifically?
Yes, I would.
Raise your hand if your government plan would provide coverage for undocumented immigrants.
Where do you stand on defund the police?
This whole movement is about rightly saying we need to take a look at these budgets.
Harris asserted that ICE is perceived as the modern-day Ku Klux Klan.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
I see no.
Are you aware that there's a perception?
That puts ICE in the same category as the KKK. Is that what you're asking me? I see no parallel.
I'm not finished.
I see none.
And yeah, I am radical. We need to get radical about what we are doing.
Oh boy, that was worse than I expected. And live from Times Square's That Kevin Show.
Somewhere in the bowels of the city that never sleeps,
Kevin McCullough, radio host with Salem Media,
is a man also not sleeping.
Syndicated radio talk show host Kevin McFarland.
And that guy would like a word with you.
Many of you know him from as Vostradamus.
Of course that Kevin show is going to be great. The only thing that could be greater, of course, would be that Donald show. But we don't have that, so we have that Kevin show.
Featuring the music of Dick Tunney and the Dream in Color Orchestra. Still to come, Kamala's score on Energy with Gabby Hoffman, sketch comedy with Tom McDonald, and Kelsey Ballerini back in the spotlight. And now, from Times Square, the man who was rumored to open for Beyonce at the Democratic National Convention, here's That Kevin.
Oh, come on, Dave. You know that's not true. I mean, Beyonce wasn't even at the convention. Goodness sake. Let's get to the news. For Assignment Desk Weekend, I'm Kevin McCullough. Since the close of the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, betting markets across the nation have shifted back from their 4.5 seconds of support for Kamala Harris and now point to a Donald J. Trump victor as the odds-on favorite to win the 2024 election. Trump received a friendly boost on Friday when RFK Jr. endorsed him. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. averages about 5 to 7 points of support in every swing state. But Assignment Desk Weekend has learned the deal was solidified when RFK said Trump had better win if he didn't want him to drop him like a bear in Central Park. Gayle King, anchor for CBS, was reprimanded on air on Friday for implying a celebrity's attendance at the DNC when previous celebrity sightings for Beyonce and Taylor Swift turned out to be nothing more than imagination. In King's situation, it was especially problematic because shortly after she announced the arrival of Kansas City Chiefs Travis Kelce being spotted, her producer said he was on her screen at an NFL preseason game in Kansas City. Proving just how disconnected from reality the DNC attendees were, a Democratic columnist has named Doug Emhoff as the new modern female fantasy, proving Democrats have no taste in men and that the best that they can put forward would be low testosterone. In sports news, the Supreme Court last week rebuked the Biden-Harris administration, saying that their new Title IX definition violated women's rights
to include biological males in its protections for, quote, women. In an immediate response, the Democratic nominee for president, Vice President Kamala Harris, asked, "But what is a woman?" And finally, tennis great Martina Navratilova is ripping the Paralympics for allowing a biological male to compete in the women's 200 and 400 events. Assignment Desk Weekend would like to also point out that it might not be seen as completely fair for an ambulatory male to compete in female sprints while identifying as a wheelchair-bound athlete. He has legs and is running. None of them are. He's not just not female. He's not wheelchair-bound. But you got to identify the way you got to identify. For Assignment Day, and I'm Kevin McFarland.
The significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time in terms of what we need to do to lay these wires, what we need to do to create these jobs. And there is such great significance to the passage of time when we think about a day in the life of our children.
There's too many songs about diamond teeth and gold chains. Too many rappers who still glorify gangs. There's way too many rhymes about codeine and women we'd like to bang. I just wanted to make a song to say thanks. Thank you to the cops who really trying to make the world a better place, risking their lives to keep a man they never even met safe. They ain't trying to kill your kids or lock their father away. They got families who need food on their plates. And thank you to the firefighters. Whenever I hear sirens, I pray. It takes a special kind of man to run toward all the flames. When we see smoke and we need help, the fire can't be contained. They running in while everybody runs away. And thank you to the soldiers fighting for us, flying way overseas. Ain't never met you, but I love you because you're dying for me. I'm enjoying my freedom, and I know freedom ain't free. When the anthem plays, I don't take a knee. And thank you to the truckers, the janitors, and the average people. The ones holding the jobs that will damage your ego. The ones who do the most and in return they get zero. Screw what anyone says, y'all are heroes. Everyday people, they know who they are. They aren't superstars and they don't fight evil. They gotta do the hours with no superpowers. Everyday people don't always save the world. They don't get the girl, but y'all are heroes. Heroes. Too many songs about Xanax and faces covered with tattoos, and way too many asses on camera with rap dudes. Too much Gucci, Louis, Prada clothing trying to brand you. I just want to make a song to say thank you. Thank you to the paramedics coming at high speed in an ambulance, trying to get someone to breathe at the scene of an accident. Covered in a stranger's blood and trying to bring them back again. Their stress levels always at a maximum. Thank you to the carpenters, mechanics, and the welders and plumbers. Y'all are building all the roofs that we're under. Swinging hammers in the pouring rain, the snow in the summer. I hope you know that I appreciate your struggle. Thank you to the nurses and doctors fighting for everyone's lives. Y'all don't always find a cure, but I believe that you tried. The guilt of seeing someone who you tried to save die, don't let it haunt you. Y'all bought them some time. And thank you to the priests and the pastors and the grocery store clerks. The ones who don't get thanked or paid enough for their work. Probably feel disrespected and I'm sure that it hurts. But let me tell you, y'all are heroes for sure. Everyday people, they know who they are. They aren't superstars and they don't fight evil. They gotta do the hours with no superpowers. Everyday people don't always save the world. They don't get the girl, but y'all are heroes. Heroes. You don't need a mask and a cape. Don't lose sleep wondering if humanity's safe. Whoa, whoa. And you don't gotta fly to the moon. Don't need x-ray sight to see the hero in you. Whoa, whoa. Everyday people, they know who they are. They aren't superstars and they don't fight evil. They gotta do the hours with no superpowers. Everyday people don't always save the world. They don't get the girl, but y'all are heroes. Heroes.
inflation soaring to its highest level in nearly 40 years.
That is called Bidenomics.
Gas prices rose again today, reaching a new all-time high.
We're still dealing with inflation, and we've got super high interest rates at the same time.
Bidenomics is working.
2/3 of Americans are just struggling to make ends meet.
And this comes after Friday's jobs report showing a spike in unemployment.
And we are very proud of Bidenomics.
Ready or not, we'll be right back. That Kevin. Back to That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back to Times Square. It's That Kevin Show, cleverly titled because I am your host, Kevin McCullough. Glad to have you here, and always thinking in this stage of the year right now about what is next for America. And one of the things, that from one of my very cool sponsors, we've been talking a lot about oilfacts.com, is the entire energy debate. What's going on? Why the outsourcing of energy is bad for America, and why there's a lot more that needs to be done domestically to help Americans, but also to do other significant things in terms of the dialogue with other countries, etc. Here to join the discussion is Gabby Hoffman from the Independent Women's Forum. She's the director of the Center for Energy and Conservation. Gabby, it's good to have you. Thanks for being here.
Good to be back, Kevin. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit about this. We have not, for the last 3.5 years, basically tapped into American energy in any kind of significant way. Has there been a price that we've paid for that on the national stage?
There is a price we're paying, and we're all seeing this in the gas pumps, the price that you pay whenever you fill up your tank. You're also seeing it in your utility bills, and even for energy adjacent expenses like groceries, transportation, what have you. So energy is life, and this depression of domestic production, or this rather insistence to move away from it, has caused us to rely on other countries. President Biden has tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, an emergency reserve that's not supposed to be tapped into for regular use. Even though we are seeing more and more oil and gas production happening, it's not because of Biden's policies. There is kind of a weird dichotomy there that there is, yes, more production happening, but it's in response to shocks in the market, shocks in world events. And so regardless of who is in office, we are seeing more production of oil and gas. And all the while, we're seeing so much sit below us, this liquid gold, as President Trump likes to refer to it, liquefied natural gas. We're sitting on trillions of cubic feet yet to be utilized in a safe fashion. Same with oil. A lot of untapped reserves there. There's at least billions of that, also with respect to oil. So they are primed to be developed safely, so we can reduce the price of all those energy adjacent products and commodities. But we have an administration which is so hell-bent on switching to net zero, switching to unreliable solar and wind, which is also why we're seeing this kind of straining of reliable energy sources, yet they actually have to go back to them. Whenever these projects falter, as we're seeing, no amount of Inflation Reduction Act money is going to salvage wind and solar, which are almost on the verge of collapse. Rooftop solar is about to declare bankruptcy, one major developer, same with just the industry as a whole. Offshore wind, onshore wind cannot be salvaged by these different kind of giveaways and bailouts. Wind generation is down historically. So these unreliable sources cannot function. And so that is why net zero is not going to work. So they're going to have to go back to and pivot back to oil, gas, and even nuclear. Nuclear has had a kind of renaissance or a resurgence. People are looking to that source where these unreliable so-called clean energy sources are faltering. But I don't think we're going to see, when push comes to shove, rather, I think we're going to see most Americans say we had misconceptions about oil and gas. Maybe they're not, and coal too. Maybe they're not as bad as touted. And we need them because we need a reliable electric grid that is not pressured from these unreliable sources. or any of this clogging of the grid from things that are intermittent and unreliable. We need this talk of data centers and them being powered by AI. There's a huge electricity demand from natural gas. Natural gas is going to largely be part of the equation if those centers are constructed and built. And same with nuclear too. So it's an interesting conversation about oil. Definitely the Biden-Harris administration policies have exacerbated this problem. But even despite that, you will see oil and gas producers or any energy producers say, in spite of that, we have to produce. There's going to be fewer leases sold for onshore and offshore oil and gas, and that is what is occurring. So any producer will tell you that we cannot develop and we cannot safely refine. And again, it's going to be ceded to, Qatar and China and these countries that don't know how to refine and produce these energy sources. Yeah,
that's the thing that I think is really disgusting is, and I have Ed Kovalik from Prairie Operating Group on the show on a regular basis, and we've talked a lot about this, but American energy producers are producing cleaner and cleaner and cleaner forms of fossil fuels, and they're using cleaner and cleaner methods to do that. In fact, Prairie, and I'm going to get out and see their production operation soon, but they don't even use fossil fuels in the moving of the drill from shale site to shale site because they have solar capability to move their drill, and so they're reducing some degree the footprint there. But what they're pulling up cleaner. They're delivering it with pipelines. They're doing things that have been done with American ingenuity that Venezuela and Iran and these other, states that are really our enemies in many ways and ideologically don't care about the planet are never going to be concerned about doing it. And yet that's where Biden goes to buy his oil.
That's so true. And it's so funny. They never fulfill their so-called Paris Climate Accord agreements. Actually, a lot of these countries, which are kind of gesturing that they will, to say, okay, America's naive, we'll agree with their, signing of the Paris Climate Accords. We'll promise we'll do that. But China's opening more coal plants, I think one a week. Russia is harnessing traditional energy sources to the Middle East, is not quitting their, not addiction, but rather their reliance on oil and gas. This upcoming climate summit, the UN COP29, is going to be in Azerbaijan, which is another heavy oil and gas producer. You really think these countries are going to renege on their oil and gas commitments? No. But the United States under this Biden-Harris administration is under this illusion and this fantasy that we have to do this, other countries will follow. This Paris Accord, it's an empty promise. It doesn't lead to emissions reduction. And in fact, the opposite is true. More countries have had to produce and harness more oil and gas and coal because of just how inefficient these kind of net zero dictates are and just how inefficient the solar and wind projects turn out to be. They can't produce any equivalent, not even a third of the same amount of electricity that coal, oil, and gas, and even nuclear produce. So there are a lot of shortcomings. And even in developing countries, which a lot of these kind of elites from Europe and even our country are going and telling them, you need to do solar. These countries don't even have baseload power. They're using biomass. They're using, human waste as a power source. They're not using coal, oil, and gas quite yet. Some countries are. Some countries have started to shed that and started to use, so-called reliable fossil fuels. But countries that aren't even primed to do renewables are being forced to do that at the insistence of the EU, the UN, and even our country, Democrats in our country. So it's crazy.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to explore two things with you. One is the message that it sends to the developing world when the first world chokes out fossil fuels. And number two, the ability to impact terrorism and war and everything else because of the manipulation of fossil fuels and what we've done to not really carry proper influence there. But Gabby Hoffman is my guest. She's the Center for Energy and Conservation's director at the Independent Women's Forum. Talking energy. Friends, it's an issue that touches every area of your life, and you know that. The reason you're paying $8 a carton for eggs right now is because it costs too much money to send it to you.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough. York, that Kevin McCullough.
Welcome back, Kevin McCullough, That Kevin Show. Gabby Hoffman is my guest from the Independent Women's Forum, one of my favorite organizations, and I love putting all their smart people on here and talking about smart things. Energy is one of those things that everyone should care about. And Gabby, I know that Kamala Harris has been trying since she was named, the supposed nominee 3 weeks ago and hasn't given an interview yet. That she was going to, change her position on fracking and oil and all the stuff. But people need to remember she co-sponsored the Green New Deal with AOC. She's got a long history of opposing fossil fuel use. And the truth is that the most developed countries on planet Earth do use fossil fuels, have figured out a way to use them effectively. And when we say to the world, we're going to stop using fossil fuels, what does that do to the poorest countries on Earth? Why do we want to insist and plunge and keep them in the dire straits of poverty that they're in?
I think when you're thinking of, let's say, the far left environmental credo, to them, they don't care if the rest of the world does not have reliable energy. They want to come save them with these platitudes, with net zero, with solar panels, with wind. That doesn't work in a lot of these climates, especially in the, let's say continental Africa or Asia and even Europe. So they want to be saviors. They want to white knight these countries that they perceive to be poor, less educated, and need to be dependent on, United States and these, hypocritical environmentalists who claim they're these climate, advocates, but in fact, they're not, especially with what they're advocating for. And I think your listeners know this very well, that a lot of these materials that are sourced for solar panels, wind turbines, EVs, they come from rare earth elements that are primarily refined and resourced and managed by China. And then they're using the labor, child labor or slave labor of people from Africa and parts of Asia as well. And so the whole very process of them claiming that this technology and this energy is green and clean, when you scratch the surface and dig further deeper, you see that it's not clean, it's not green. And so and I think people in these countries that are debating whether or not to follow in the United States lead with going net zero, although, like I said, I think our journey into net zero is not going to succeed because the shortcomings that are transpiring, of course, and people recognizing, and even net zero proponents and tech companies that are saying, we need to pull back net zero aims. We're not going to claim net zero or carbon neutrality anymore because it's not good with our bottom line and it's leading to energy shortages. So these countries are saying, why would the United States want us to depress our potential, keep us in the dark, and yet we can't harness energy, we can't harness this, we can't extract minerals safely, we can't use coal, oil, and natural gas, which will help us advance to maybe second world or even first world potential. Yeah. I think we have a lot of redistributionists here, Marxists even, who don't want other countries to succeed with the tools that we've had to succeed. And even if other countries are adopting more free market environmental policies, that doesn't mean we have to take a backseat when they truly do it. Why can't they also share in energy prosperity and success in clean conditions like we have? And then our country going on this very nonsensical path to abandon what has powered us, what also has clothed us. I think what everyone forgets is when you're calling for net zero, you're also advocating for downstream negative effects to anything that is based off of energy. So it's not just your energy consumption and production, it's the products and the byproducts from petroleum that are also going to suffer and take a hit as well. It doesn't just stop at this
the services, just the idea of refrigeration and climate control for heating and for air conditioning. We've saved millions of lives over the last 100 years. In fact, fatalities have plummeted in terms of numbers due to climate related and, spoilage of food and all that kind of stuff, because we had fossil fuels that gave us refrigeration, transportation, and ultimately a controllable climate, so people didn't swelter to death, they didn't freeze to death. And yet that is all looked at with disdain by the Kamala Harris factions that now want to have the reins of power. I guess my last question, Gabby, we've only got about 30 seconds here. If she is given control, do we have any reason to think that she's going to pursue a healthy energy policy that is not just good for America, but that's good for the emerging world and good for human flourishing. Because at the end of the day, I think fossil fuels help human beings flourish, and that's what we need.
I don't see any indication that that would be the case under a hypothetical Harris administration. Her big thing is electric school buses. I don't think she has a cogent energy policy except for the Green New Deal and to upend what has worked for us. And
do you know how heavy the batteries are for the school buses? They're like 8,000 pounds each. You'd have to rebuild all of the bridges in New York to sustain buses that have batteries carrying them that much. It's just obscene. And she acts like she's just, they're not listening to Gabby Hoffman.
Stick around for more of That Kevin. Next, That Kevin Show. Here he is from New York, That Kevin McCullough.
What? No, it's Diet Coke. I've gone to almost exclusively Diet Coke since Donald Trump and Elon Musk were having the Diet Coke on X that night. You don't believe? Get the camera up over here. Get the overhead. Take a look. See? It's got the foam and everything. I got the empty can right here. It's Diet Coke. Stop it. All right, welcome. It's Kevin McCullough. Glad to have you with us. And what I don't want you to stop is the amazing job you did in responding to us last week on our goal to get 600 hungry children fed this summer for the coming year. Now, these are children that have been very severely food malnourished for some time. And in fact, they are all on the edge of death. But Food for the Poor, my wonderful partners that work in 17 different Caribbean, South American, and other countries around the world where extreme poverty and hunger are kind of combining forces. They are very encouraged. We started out this campaign with 600 children that needed to be fed. And as of right now, this very minute, we are closing in on the first 100 of those being fed. Now, just a week ago, we were only at about a third of that. So now we have kind of fast forwarded, and now we're pushing into the second 100 very, very shortly. And I want every single one of you to understand that if you give right now, your gift will be matched in full. So the number of children you feed, if you do it right now, will be doubled. Someone else is going to come alongside and feed the same number of kids as you. And that's why I need your help. 855-349-4673 is the number, 855-349-4673. Or as you see on your screen, the word instagood.org also works. Instagood, like try to do some good instantly. It's a great little catchy thing. Instagood.org will take you directly to the donation page. Now, you may be saying, Kev, what is this? What's going on? All right. So in Haiti, where I am focused on, because my oldest son is adopted from Haiti, I was able, very much by God's grace, be able to bring him to the U.S. right in the middle of a military coup and a shutdown and bad relationships with the United States and a whole bunch of stuff all happening at the same time. God, in his profound grace, allowed me to get in and get him and get back to the States in the middle of all of that craziness. And ever since that time, he and I have talked at length about how we can help those that are still in Haiti, specifically orphan children that have been left, that are hungry, and that have nowhere else to go. And a number of years ago, when I started working with a group called Food for the Poor, I was very pleased to understand that one of their major focuses is children in Haiti. And so this last summer, Paul Jacobs and the crew came to me and they said, hey, Kev, we know Haiti's on your heart. You know they've had famine. You know they've had hurricane. You know they've had earthquakes. All of this stuff has set back food production incredibly, and they only had a minimal of food production to begin with because the island has largely been stripped of all of its natural resources from the kind of corrupt administrations that just continued to do things that were not healthy. And so if you continue to plant a lot of coffee plants and you never let the ground rest and you do the kinds of things that have happened, plus you have the extreme weather, you kind of strip the soil of its nutrients. And over time, there's just not much that grows. So having said that, they came to me and they said, we've got 600 children this summer that if we do not get them fed this summer, we feel like they're not going to be around a year from now. So they came up with this program and they said for $80, one person can feed one child for an entire year. $80 will supply 700 plus meals for the coming year for that one child. That's 2 meals a day for the next year. Now, you may be saying, how can they do that? I can't buy food for one of my children for $80 in a given month, much less feed them 2 meals a day for the coming year. It's the power of leverage. It's the power of bargaining. They have a rice supplier. They have a bean supplier. There are other different elements in nutrients and proteins and stuff that they are able to put into this food. But the idea is, for an $80 gift, you can save a child who is going to starve otherwise for the coming year. And these 600 that they've identified for us are the most critical needs children. And the nice thing about Food for the Poor is that they work through, they don't go through the corrupt governments. They don't go through the warlords. They don't do anything else. They work directly with pastors and ministry leaders that are on the ground, and those pastors know the home and family and child of each one of these children that we're talking about. They know the name of each of these 600 kids. So we have said to 70 of those children, for the coming year, you are all good to go. You're going to be fed 2 meals a day for 70 of those 600 children. That means that 530 of them are not yet spoken for, and we are running out of time. We only have a few weeks left to be able to accomplish this. And I would love for tonight to have a huge response, just tons of people, $80, $80, $80. Maybe you can do a $240 gift. That would feed 3 children for the next year, 700 plus meals each. That's like 2,100 meals. But here's the thing. If you do it right now, that matching gift is going to go into effect. And if you do it right now, this night, that $240 gift that would save the lives of 3 kids is now going to save the lives of 6 kids, because they're going to double the impact of your gift because of that matching grant. So we need your help right now to go to the phone and say, I'm gonna at least save one child tonight. 855-349-4673. 855-349-4673. You can also do it online at instagood.org. Instagood. Do some instantgood.org. And if you do it tonight, before the clock strikes midnight, it will be matched dollar for dollar. You will help the child that is in most need of help, and it's gonna change a life. Friends, many of you stepped up last week. We are up to 70 of those 600 children that have been rescued. Thank you. Every one of those 70 children matter, but that means 530 of them have not yet been reached, and I'm more worried about them now because I really do care. So please, every gift is matched right now. $80, $240, $2,400. You make the gift, it will be matched.
Ready or not, we'll be right back.